Hey there, art nerds. So recently we talked about the Paul Rubens Gucci tubes, and that was a bit of a to be continued because I decided that the pans deserve their own video, and rather than us having a 2-hour deep dive video, I decided to break it up and give them their due diligence. So today we are talking about the revised Paul Rubens Gucci half pans. And if this format looks familiar, your eyes are not deceiving you. I can't wait to talk about these oversized pan watercolors with you guys today. Hey there, art nerds. You may have seen me hint at this in another video. You may have seen me swatch these. This is the full review of these watercolors, the full standalone. So I am going to go ahead and unbox and swatch these for you guys. And I have to kind of keep this straight in my head because this is a revised version of Paul Rubens' classical watercolors. The tubes did not work super well. So I'm going to be sharing footage between two videos. I am sure I'm going to confuse the heck out of myself. So this came from AliExpress. It came in a bag that looked like a garbage bag. It was heavily wrapped in bubble wrap, and then it was shrink wrapped. I don't think it needed the heavy bubble wrap. And inside, ooh, those are beautiful. We have Gansai style pans like you might be familiar with from Boku Undo or from Kuretake. These are Chinese watercolors rather than being Gansai watercolors, and it'll be interesting to compare these against Gansai watercolors to see how the two differ. This is the 36 color set with 2 of these being metallic. Paul Rubens also offers an all metallic set in a similar style, and we will talk about that in another video. So today I want to unbox, swatch these, compare them against Gansai style watercolors, and perhaps talk about what I believe they're meant to replace. So here is my order from AliExpress. I actually ordered from a different vendor this time, and this set costs $43.23 on AliExpress, and that's including shipping, so it would be $35.74. Here are the options on AliExpress. You can do 24 colors, 12 colors, 36 colors. They did used to have a 48 color one. That is no longer available. This is the older set, I believe. I'll open that in another tab and check that out. And they have a few other options as well. So these are listed, the paint type is listed as propylene, which is an encouraging thought. And it's intended for landscape, scenery, and still life. Outdoor sketching for art students, painting creation for artists. They feature high saturation, water soluble, rich color, and strong durability. These are solid pigment for Chinese painting, and they were made in mainland China. So here are the dimensions. These are larger pans, so again, Gansai style pans. And that is pretty much it on AliExpress. Now this isn't the exact same set, this is the metallic set, and I do have the metallic set and I will talk about it at a later time, but there isn't a lot of information available for the non-metallic set, so I was thinking some of this might be cross-applicable because they're both made by Paul Rubens, they are both in the Gucci, and I really need to look up how to say that word before I keep saying that word line, and they are both Gansai style-ish-esque watercolors, I'm saying until I know better. So these, the metallics, claim to be quality classical watercolor paints. They use natural minerals as raw materials. It's traditional Chinese watercolor with perfect colorfulness, good light fastness, strong coverage, very suitable for artists of all levels. So these are the glitter ones. We're going to skip this. Beautifully embossed big paint blocks. And I did notice that even with the two metallics in the set that I do have, the gold has the same embossment that you would see on the metallic set, and if these have been kind of used, it looks like, so you can't quite see it there. They promise that these are artist quality, so they're not calling them professional grade, they're saying artist quality, which is kind of a mishmash, flim-flam word. I am an artist, so I'm going to be judging whether or not I feel like this quality is up to my standard. And apparently this listing also comes with a hot press watercolor pad. And that's basically the information that is provided on here. Now, I know there are other reviews of these available. As always, when I'm reviewing art supplies, I try to avoid other people's reviews until I've come to my own conclusions so that I don't bias myself. That way, you know, my opinions can be as much my own. However, if there's something I'm confused about, a point that doesn't really make sense, or I want to see what other artists are saying about these sort of things, then I will typically double check against what other artists are saying about it. This palette didn't come with any pamphlets or any brochures, which is kind of unusual because Paul Rubens does typically send like swatch sheets and informational booklets out with their products. They are loose in the palette, and on the back is a color number that corresponds with their spot in the palette, and then probably the color name. And they seem pretty similar to Kuretake's Gansai Tambi watercolors. For the swatch portion, I'm going to do two types of swatches. I am going to swatch on cold press cotton rag watercolor paper, and I am going to swatch on Chinese ripe Shan paper. So this, I believe, would be considered a rice paper here in the US, although, you know, they're not necessarily made from rice fibers. But just so you guys kind of know what I'm swatching on, I'm going to swatch on both of these. If you are new here, if this is your first time watching one of my reviews, hi, hello, I'm Becca Hilburn. I'm a watercolor comic artist and illustrator. I've been reviewing watercolors to help other people find a good fit for their art supply needs for almost 10 years now. I got my start with a blog several years ago, and I have been on YouTube for, I think, let's see, 2015 to 2024, so about 7 years now. So that's pretty exciting. I enjoy reviewing watercolors. This is a hobby for me, and most of the time I purchase what I'm reviewing, including today. These were purchased using funds from my teaching gigs as well as funds from Patreon. So if you like what I do and you want to help me continue to do it, you can join me at patreon.com/natosoup. Now, I'm not really the conventional watercolor artist here on YouTube. I paint comics, I paint a lot of figures, I do paint a good amount of backgrounds, and so that's the lens that I'm going to be looking at these watercolors from today. I do have some experience with origami and Gansai style watercolors, so I am going to be comparing these to those, but I don't have much practical experience when it comes to Chinese watercolor and traditional Chinese watercolor. So that is not the lens that I am going to be looking at these watercolors with today. But if I like them, I may use them to try those kind of techniques at a later date. I have a lot of experience with reviewing Paul Rubens watercolors. I've been reviewing Paul Rubens for quite some time now. And if you're interested in checking out other products from Paul Rubens, you can find links in the description and possibly links in the cards. It kind of depends on what I decide to use the cards with. Now, I am trying to open up this brand new pad of watercolor paper, and my X-Acto blade has gone for a little walk, so I'm gonna go find it. Consumables like watercolor paper are also made possible thanks to the generosity of my patrons. So again, if you like what I do and you want to help me do it, you can join me over there. So I am going to start by swatching on the cotton paper, and then I am going to move over to the ripe Shawn paper. So while swatching these, I noticed that these activate quickly and easily with no need for pre-activation. The colors pollute the water quickly. The colors do seem to flood the washout rather quickly. I'm not sure if I'm giving them enough space though. The colors are pretty, but there are a lot of greens that are very similar in this set. The colors in this set in general though are really pretty. They have good color saturation, pretty immediate color payoff. The silver takes some doing, but it has a really pretty flake to it. So as the cotton rag dried, I noticed that even with larger swatch areas, there's a lot of color flooding without necessarily the granulation you might expect to see from Western style watercolors. Some colors do have interesting granulation like 144, and some of the neutrals seem to contain a black like 150 and 130 to give depth to the color. This is pretty common with Chinese style neutrals, and it may be because they're not really designed to be used in dilution and in a wash. I set up the rice paper right after I did the cotton rag swatches, and I noticed that if you let water sit on the pans, they do get soupy. If color and saturation control are important to you, you're going to want a mixing surface. The colors hold together better on the rice paper. There's less granulation and separation, which is probably what these paints were originally formulated for anyway. I'm still trying to decide how I want to handle the rest of the review regarding color mixing, wet and wet, and field test, at least at this point in time. So if these are supposed to be the replacement for Paul Rubens' other classical watercolors, I can kind of see why. Here they are on the cotton rag paper. The colors are really bright and fairly saturated. Here they are on the rice paper, maybe a little bit less saturated, but still really pretty. Something that I noticed with the cotton rag is as it dried, there's a lot of color flooding without necessarily the granulation you might expect from Western style watercolors. Some colors do have interesting granulation like 144 here, and some of the neutrals contain a black like 130 and 150 to give depth to the color. This is something I also noticed with Kuretake's Art Nouveau palette. This is pretty common with Chinese style neutrals, and maybe because they're not really designed to be used in dilution and in a wash. And we can see over here on the rice paper where I didn't wash them out that we're not necessarily seeing that sort of black gritty granulation with the neutrals. We are still getting that really pretty blue granulation though with 144. Colors held together better on the rice paper, less granulation and separation, which is probably what these paints were originally formulated for anyway. Right now, I'm still trying to decide how I want to handle the rest of this review, how I'm going to handle color mixing, if I'm going to do wet and wet, what kind of field tests I want to do. So I'm going to let that bake for a little bit. Of course, I wanted to do some comparison swatches. So these are the older Gucci tubes that the pan set I think is designed to replace. Now this is a larger set, so it has more and different colors. Given that I ran out of space, it's a little difficult to see how many similar greens there are, but it does seem like they adjusted the blue and green ratio a bit between the two palettes, maybe to serve the subject matter better. for clarity's sake, when I said this is a larger set, I meant the pan set is a larger set. It has 36 pans, whereas the tube set, which I can't find it anymore. Maybe you guys can. That is a 24 tube set. And the reason I wanted to do a head-to-head swatch for these is because I think the pans are designed as a replacement for the tubes. After having swatched both, it seems like the pans were a really smart move on Paul Rubens' part. Hey guys, it's time to do a little color mixing. So with these kinds of watercolors, as well as Gansai style watercolors, they're not really designed for color mixing, but I do want to see what kind of secondary mixes we can get. So that's one of the reasons why these sort of sets are often available with so many colors, is you're supposed to basically find the color that you want to use and with very minimal mixing be able to use it immediately, which could be great for people who like to work quickly, for card makers, for comic painters, that sort of thing. That said, I like to be able to get some custom mixes in there, so I'm going to test these out for secondary mixes. So while I do have written show notes, I don't have written show notes for this part, and I don't really know why. I wanted to do a little bit of secondary color mixing, even though we have a really large set of colors to work with, and this style of watercolor is generally not designed for color mixing. It's designed for you to be able to go into the pan and get the color you want with minimal mixing, maybe some wet into wet, sort of like Gansai style watercolors. But I did find that I was able to successfully mix several secondary colors, and while they do dry a little bit less saturated than I might want, I was able to come up with some really beautiful secondary colors, and this is going to be really helpful in the field test because I like to custom mix my colors. I'm really glad I did the color mixing, even though we have so many colors to play with, because it did give us some useful information. It also gave me an idea for a sunset granulation bookmark I want to do with you guys before we do the mud test. And it's also given me some useful information for how I want to go about field testing these paints. So next, I want to try using these paints to paint a gradiated sunset on this watercolor paper, and this is the same thing we've been using. It is the Blick Studio Cotton Rag watercolor paper. After playing around with these colors, I felt really inspired, and I wanted to do a quick watercolor bookmark. Now, if you hear that noise in the background, that's my husband running the water. I'm sorry, I told him I was recording, but you know, we live in an open concept house. What are you gonna do? So with this bookmark, I tape down all four sides, and I'm starting with a quick and kind of sloppy gradiated wash of yellow into kind of a reddish pink, and I'm allowing it to kind of mix on the cotton rag paper and kind of working it back and forth to get that subtle sort of design. I allowed it to dry fully, and then I applied some tape at the horizon line, and now I am applying a gradiated wash of blue, purple to hot pink for our sky. And while that's still wet, working in some darker colors. I used a coin wrapped in a paper towel to remove our sun, and then I'm using a clean paper towel to kind of blot out some cloud shapes. I allowed that to dry fully before I remove my masking tape, and now I'm going to start painting the sun itself, so I'm using kind of a red for that, as well as the water down below. Removing a little bit of rim lighting on the sun just to kind of give it that sort of glowing effect. And then I allowed it to dry. The water, I'm going to kind of mirror what's going on in the sky. While working on this field test, I really enjoyed painting with these paints. I really enjoyed what the colors had to offer. I enjoyed the large size of the pans. I enjoyed the immediacy of color activation. I enjoyed the color choices. I found this a fun and fairly inspiring set to paint with, especially for something as brilliant as a sunset. My only complaint in terms of and we're going to compare these to Gansai style watercolors soon, is it's not like these are cheaper. They are about as expensive as Gansai style watercolors, and they're actually a little bit harder to get a hold of. But the takeaway from this is, if you're looking for kind of an easy, beginner friendly watercolor set, Gansai and Gucci style watercolors might be an excellent fit for you and for your painting needs. You can layer these, you can lift these, you can mix these, you can do all of the same techniques that you would be able to do with traditional watercolor, traditional Western style watercolors. So if you are looking for big, open, easy to use pans that don't require a lot of prep in advance, these could be an excellent fit. Now, with Gansai style watercolors, I know that Gansai uses animal hide glue as the binder, which is not vegan friendly. It's not vegetarian friendly. I don't know what binder Gucci uses. If you guys know, let me know in the comments. But the thing about animal hide glue is that once it's dry, it's basically on that paper. You're not going to be able to lift it up the way you can often lift things up with gum arabic or honey-based Western style watercolors. So that is something to keep in mind. Now let's do the wet into wet test before we start the full field test. It seems a little bit out of order, but after doing that bookmark field test, I decided to demonstrate the wet into wet for you guys so you guys can see how these handle on cotton rag paper with a bunch of water. How much they move or don't move, how much they granulate, how much they layer, how much they turn to mud. And as with many of Paul Rubens' products, I was very pleased with what I saw. I liked the color movement. I liked the granulation. I liked in dilution that we get misty effects. I didn't notice any flocculation or scaling. I didn't notice any extreme clumping or anything that might otherwise give me pause or make me hesitate with how I could use these watercolors. This palette doesn't come with a swatch sheet, so I wanted to make a swatch reference for myself for when I do the field test. So I'm just doing really large, broad strokes on a sheet of cotton rag watercolor paper that I can leave in the lid of this palette so that I know what every color looks like. Some of the darker colors in mass tone, it can be hard to see how vibrant and vivid they actually are, which I actually find bodes well for the quality of watercolors. It means they're not full of fillers unnecessarily. And we also have some really beautiful, more opaque colors like that spring green and that cobalt teal and that beautiful purple there on the end. So in the other Paul Rubens Gucci video, the tube one, we've already did our comparative swatches of the Gucci pans versus the dried out Gucci pans. So these are the original tubes, dried out and half pans. This is the revised, already in a pan format that we're taking a look at today. While I did kind of like this set, the smell was so intensely strong. I 100% can understand why they reformulated. If you guys are curious about this other set, it has its own video. I'll link it for you guys down in the description below. I'm trying to work on getting my videos shorter again because you guys asked, and those are so much easier for me to edit, so I like 100% agree with you guys. But these, as you guys probably recognize, are the watercolors that we took a look at today. So what I want to do before we move on to the field test is I have some of the Paul Rubens G4. These were the tube set. I do also have the half pan set, but let's keep things simple today. We're gonna take a look at the tube set. We're gonna compare these head to head on some more cotton rag watercolor paper. And again, I wanna thank my amazing patrons. It is your support over on Patreon that enables me to purchase things like copious amounts of block bound watercolor paper. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to still be working on the Blick like we have right here. And I believe I'm going to start with the OG, the G4. I wanted to compare these watercolors against some of Paul Rubens' more traditional offerings. So these are the G4 Generation 4 watercolors that I reviewed a little bit earlier this year. While I didn't find them to be a significant improvement on Paul Rubens' prior watercolor offerings, they are fine, and I still wanted to swatch them and compare them for you guys in case you were trying to decide on just one Paul Rubens palette and you were trying to decide if the Gucci or the G4 were the right fit for you. So these are tube watercolors that I set up to dry in half pans. They do also have half pans readily available. Obviously, the half pans are much smaller than the large Gucci size pans, but you can see that with Paul Rubens, you get a lot of color payoff and color delivery. That's one of the things that in general I really like about this brand is how bright and vivid and saturated their watercolors are, which if you follow my watercolor art, if you are familiar with my watercolor comic, then you know that I love really bright, brilliant, and saturated colors. Here are the Gucci pans. These do not require pre-activation, unlike the G4 dried in tube watercolors, which do. So that means you can get started painting much quicker, and there is a different color selection between the two palettes, with the Gucci having more like traditional Chinese watercolor-esque colors. If you're familiar with traditional Chinese watercolor, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about, where we get like these cinnabars, we get these kind of terracottas, we get indigos, we get these bright spring greens, we get these more opaque bright blues, that sort of color palette. Honestly, I kind of like the Gucci pans better than the G4 tubes. I like the color selection. I like how easy they are to use. So like personally, that would be my recommendation, but they are harder to find than the G4 tubes. So the Gucci set is a larger set, so it does have more and different colors than the 24 color G4 set. Given that I ran out of space, it's a little difficult to see how many similar greens there are, but it does seem like they adjusted the blue and green ratio a bit between the two sets, maybe to serve the intended subject matter. Before I dive into the field test, I actually want to do some comparison swatches against Gansai watercolors. So I have Kuretake's Gansai Tambi. I also have, I believe these are Boko Undo's Gansai. I have Akashia Gansai somewhere and I can't find them, so I guess I won't be including them in this comparison. So we have 3 Chinese brands, right? No, two Chinese brands that I'm going to compare against the Paul Rubens Gucci today, or Gucci. Let me know gently in the comments how to say that. Swatches, since I'm mostly just going to be looking at color, I am going to use my Blick Block Bound. Wow, I was trying so hard to say that without Blick Block Bound. My Blick Block Bound cotton rag paper today. So here are the Paul Rubens Gucci pans. You guys could see how similar they look to Gansai style watercolors. Now, Gansai is just a type of watercolor that's popular in Japan. Lots of different brands offer Gansai style watercolors. We are going to actually swatch a few. You guys are probably already familiar with the Kuretake Gansai Tambi. We've talked about that here a lot on the channel. It was an extremely popular palette on the internet for a really long period of time. I think it's still got a lot of fans. So I thought this would be a great head-to-head comparison so that we can look at the colors and we can look at the performance. I found in general that Gucci activates and handles pretty much the same way that Gansai handles. So if you like Gansai, you'll probably like Gucci. If, you know, the problem is access and affordability. The Gucci are actually more expensive than the Gansai, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but they're also like way less accessible. Kuretake has been distributing Gansai watercolors here in the US for over a decade now. Every art supply store sells them. You can get them at Michael's. They have that economy of scale in their favor that Paul Rubens just doesn't have. Now, I also want to point out, and I probably pointed this out earlier, but I do want to remind you guys, I bought the Gucci set out of pocket. This is the Kisho Gansai. I bought these while I was in Japan in 2018. One of the interesting things about these, and I did actually talk about these quite a bit on the channel, is that they sell these at department stores. Tokyo Hands has these. Art supplies are much more ubiquitous and common in Japan than they are in the US. So they're actually fairly inexpensive in Japan. They were like 300 yen-ish each open stock, which is why I have kind of an interesting little assortment. Whereas in the US, you can buy Gansai open stock. Places like St. Louis Art Supply carries the Kuretake Gansai Tambi, but it's harder to find them open stock, and you basically have to either know what you're looking for and order it online, or very specific stores will have them open stock. So if you had like one of the sets, for example, the 24 color set, and you wanted to buy a few additional colors, like they have a Gofun white, which is like a shell white that I'd actually really like because it's kind of an off white, and I think that would be very useful for me. You have to kind of hunt it down and buy it. And places like Blick do sell them individually, but it's not like in Japan where you can just go to a department store and pick out some colors that you like. All in all, though, I did find that the Gucci set handles very similarly to Gansai style watercolors. So if you had to choose between the two and all prices were about the same, they're about the same. They are not better than the Gansai style watercolors. They're not worse than the Gansai style watercolors. Now, I did notice that the Gucci set had a lot of colors with similarities to the Art Nouveau set. So I decided to go ahead and re-swatch that too, so that you guys could just kind of get an idea for the colors in these sets and how they handle. But again, they all handle very similarly. They're based along a similar design. If you have one set, you probably do not need the other sets. So after swatching 4 sets, because we swatched the Paul Rubens, we swatched the Boku Undo, we swatched the Kuretake 24 color set, and then I swatched the Kuretake Art Nouveau set, I feel like the Gucci pans seem pretty comparable, maybe even a little bit more saturated than the original Kuretake. Only time will tell if they'll hold up as well as this older Boku Undo set. Playing with the Gucci set really kind of emboldened me to try doing a field test in my normal sort of illustration style. So I have this inked illustration of this adorable kiddo holding a doodle bug. This has been printed onto Canson Arches, sorry, watercolor paper. It was inked with a Sakura Pigma FB. I started with the pour punch technique to kind of capture the joy that this kiddo feels over her new friend. I went with a couple of pastels, 149, 147, 103. 147 granulates a bit, not a whole lot though. This palette takes up a lot of desk space. So if you paint big and have a small work area, you may need to figure out a tabouret or a cart. So doing lots of splatters, doing lots of pouring. I was happy to see that these colors did not turn to mud when they mixed together on the paper. And I also kind of like the opacity that these opaque colors kind of held on to. Sometimes with cheaper watercolors, you lose that opacity. It's all optical brightener and it kind of just turns to mud on the paper. So I was really happy to see how well these held out. So while I was painting this, I kind of forgot that this was a field test, which is always a good sign. I do feel like once you start watering these down, you lose color quick. You can paint over without reactivation or it turning to mud. You can mix skin tones, although they're kind of challenging to bulk up in saturation. You guys will see with this piece, it stays very pastel throughout. You can layer and build up colors. The colors do go kind of opaque quickly, so you're going to need to re-ink if you're painting on top of a line art. And I would say that these are pretty comparable to Kuretake's Gansai Tambi. So if you live in China or if these are accessible to you, these are a fine substitute, I would say, for the Kuretake Gansai Tambi. But if you don't, if they are expensive for you or if they're hard to find, you're not super missing out. I'm kind of a weird completionist who likes to try new things so that you guys don't have to. So, you know, that was kind of the appeal for me, but not everybody feels this way. So for her hair, I actually wanted to try this underpainting technique using this kind of beautiful neutral color that's in this palette. And I am painting the shadow. So I'm grise painting her hair first. And then I am going to paint kind of like a goldenish blonde on top of it. Decided to extend this grise effect to the rest of the illustration as well, with the exception of her skin tone. And part of this is I will do a grise underpainting when I haven't yet decided on all of the colors that I want to use. This allows me to get those shadows in early. I will also do grise when I'm going to be working with some opaque colors and I want to get those shadows in rather than trying to paint them on top of it and it kind of fall apart or reactivate the color or it turn to mud. This is just a method that I found a lot of success with. So I'm really glad that they included this kind of neutral tint. And it isn't necessarily a color that I've seen all the time with the Gansai Tambi sets. I do wish Kuretake would introduce this kind of a color because it's a really useful color. However, that said, this kind of painting, this kind of field test with these kind of watercolors or with Gansai watercolors, this is not actually what they recommend. You can do this, but these kind of paints are really designed more for like etagame or Chinese watercolor, a thicker, less layered approach, more immediate, you know, not as belabored as this. So I'm kind of pushing it to do what I want it to do, not necessarily what it's designed to do well. So, you know, I was very pleased with how they handled this abuse, how well they were able to handle these kind of techniques, this kind of layering, me doing like a skin tone shading color. It handled it very beautifully because that's not really what these kind of watercolors are intended for. And I think it's important to point out because sometimes people will see other artists hyping up Gansai style watercolors, they will buy them, and then they'll be kind of disappointed because they don't handle quite the way they were led to believe. So I want to be just really honest with you guys that this is not really the intended use case. This is not classical watercolor painting. This is not classical Chinese watercolor. This is Becca doing her own weird thing here. And they took to it quite well. Now, something that I really do also love about these watercolors is even though I was working with opaque colors and that helped the illustration kind of stand out from the background. You can still see, if you look closely, those splatters and that kind of shaded color through. And I really love how that turned out for this illustration. I think it turned out very cute and very joyful. I was very pleased with how this watercolor illustration turned out, and I had a lot of fun painting with these paints. So this set is very easy to paint with, very fun to paint with. It does have some peccadillos, like with the opacity and with weaker color mixes, but it is still a very fun set to paint with. I do think compared to Gansai, like Kuretake Gansai Tambi, the mixes are a little bit weaker than what I've seen and what I've, discovered over the years of using Gansai Tambi. But as I mentioned earlier, this isn't really the intended use case for these kind of watercolors. So I'm kind of pushing it to do something that they're not really designed to do. And I'm really happy with the end result, but I'm aware that this is not the design use case. And I want to be really clear about this, because I find that YouTube has this culture of you gotta catch it all, like art supplies are like Pokemon. And if you collect art supplies like I do, like a lot of artists do, and you understand that, that's one thing. I'm not really talking about that. I'm saying I have no need or desire to make you feel like your art is incomplete without this set. I don't want to make hyperbolic claims. I don't want to make you feel like you're missing out, because you're not. If you have Gansai watercolors already, whether it's the Gansai Tambi or another set that you really like, if you have the Mozart Como Rebi set, you already have what this set can do. You don't have to go out and find this set. You don't have to go out and buy this set. I know a lot of YouTubers, especially art tubers, a lot of the money comes from affiliate links. That hasn't been my personal experience. You guys tend not to check the affiliate links in my description, which is fine. I don't count on that money, but I know a lot of art YouTubers, that is a source of income from them. So there is a vested interest in people buying those products in general. With this, I really want to make it clear you are not missing out if you don't buy this set. I'm reviewing this for two reasons. One, I'm really interested in what Paul Rubens is bringing to the market. I think they've been doing some interesting things. I think they hit some interesting price points. Their Mei watercolors are one of my favorite student grade watercolors, and it's one that I recommend often. So in general, I am just interested in Paul Rubens as a brand, and I am interested in what they make for their Chinese facing market, which is what I think this product is. I think this is for their Chinese facing market. I don't really get the impression that it's for US consumers. There's no US packaging. There's no English packaging. It's not easy to find this set on Amazon. You can find the metallic set on Amazon. I got this off of AliExpress. They're not really making an attempt at the US market with this set. So part of me is reviewing this as somebody who's interested in Chinese watercolor and who has reviewed several Chinese watercolors over the years, who is interested in Asian watercolor in general and has reviewed several Asian watercolor sets over the years, both Western style and styles that are a reflection of that particular culture, like the Shinhan Korean colors, or like Gansai watercolors, or like traditional Japanese watercolors. That's something I want to talk about at some point with you guys. It's just kind of expensive, so I'm kind of saving my money up for that. So I am not trying to tell you guys you need this set, because I don't think you need this set. I think if you've got Gansai watercolors, you're good. You do not need the set, and a lot of y'all do. I know it's one of the most popular watercolor sets. I know most of you guys already have Gansai watercolors. Also, I am taking a look at this set because I do know that there are people in other countries who watch what I do. The vast majority of you guys are US based, but I do have people in India and in China who watch my stuff. Hey guys, thank you guys so much for hanging out and watching this. And this set might be more accessible or more affordable to them than the Kuretake Gansai Tambi sets. So, if you have the two sets side by side, I wanted to be able to give you guys an honest review and an honest comparison so that you guys can make an educated decision. So hopefully this review has done that. I just wanted to kind of clarify this because I do say a lot of really positive things about this set. I do really like this set, but it is more expensive, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, than the Gansai Tambi set. And it's much harder to get a hold of than the Gansai Tambi set. So I don't want to give you guys FOMO. I don't want you guys to feel like you're missing out on something. Take this review as your like check mark on the checklist, okay? You don't need this one. It's a fun set. It's a fine set, but it's not doing anything different or unusual that you couldn't see from Gansai style watercolors. And frankly, for the market it's trying to serve, it probably doesn't need to do those things. It is probably much more accessible and much cheaper in China than the Gansai watercolors. If you guys actually know, let me know. I am kind of curious about that. And it's definitely going to be more accessible for the Chinese market. So I do think it serves a purpose. I think I'm just a weird bycatch, a viewer who is not necessarily the intended consumer, the intended audience. So sometimes with art supply reviews, I end up creating an illustration where I really love the line art and I think it's really cute, and then the paints kind of ruin it for me. I really like the line art for this, and I really love how the illustration turned out. I think it turned out very cute, and when I shared it on social media, a lot of people really liked it too. Who knew how many people love isopods and love insects and bugs? So you guys will probably see more insect art from me in the future because I really enjoyed painting this, and I know I have like at least 3 more designs that are all like a firefly, a ladybug, and a honeybee that are all kind of in the family of this. Am I going to use the Gucci paints with that? Probably not, because I feel this palette's going to struggle with darker skin tones, and at least one of those characters is a darker skinned person. So I may switch over, but I really do want to keep the like light, airy, joyful pastel theme going. So still have to kind of think about that, but keep an eye out on my socials. If you love my art and you want to see more of it, you can find me at NattoSoup everywhere, and I share art all the time, so it's kind of hard to miss me once you start following what I do. We really have put these watercolors through their paces. We've done a couple of different tests in a couple of different styles, and hopefully I was able to demonstrate the information that you guys need. At the time of this recording, these Paul Rubens Gucai watercolors are still not available on Amazon. They are basically more commonly available on AliExpress, at least to a Western audience. If you live in China though, you're probably gonna have a lot easier time finding them. That said, while I like these paints and I will probably use them, I don't know if I can recommend them if you can easily and cheaply buy Gansai watercolors like Kuretake or Boku Undo. I don't know if it's because the Gansai Tambi watercolors are just at a really cheap price on Amazon right now. When I checked for this review, they are going for 33 bucks on Amazon. Now this brings up a point I do want to talk to you guys about. Not everything I review on the channel is about finding the quality watercolors at the cheapest price. I don't want y'all to think that is my only goal. I don't think everything should just be at rock bottom prices. I'm an artist. I charge what I charge for my art. I feel like other artists should have the room to charge what they charge for their art. And if I was only ever talking about the cheapest, nicest watercolors, I feel like that's kind of a strange reflection on what I do, because you do have to make some money in order to be able to continue doing business and to be able to earn a living. So that's not really my goal. I do recognize though that a lot of you guys are on a budget, you're looking to get into art, and I really want you guys to be able to start out with the nicest art supplies you can afford to do so. So that is one of my goals, even if it's sometimes at contrapoints with what I just said. All in all though, I want to have the pleasure of introducing you guys to watercolors you may never have heard of, you may never have considered, you may not come across in your day-to-day life. I love exploring the world of watercolor, both physically when I can and virtually all the time. And I love being able to share what I found with you, and I love seeing what you guys find in return. Let's talk about the pros and cons of the Paul Rubens classical Gucci 36 color watercolor set. This is a lovely set. They really improved on the tube version of this set. There's no strange smells, there's no weird separation. They are quick to activate, they deliver a lot of color. They are beautiful, both mixed and at reduced saturations, as well as at fuller strength. This is a lovely set with lovely colors. The large pans are great for bigger brushes, easy to use and activate, so it's very user-friendly, especially for my friends who might be newer to watercolor. It's easy to use for techniques like wet into wet splatters, layering, etc. I did not have any problems or strangeness with that. If you like Gansai Tambi, you'll probably like these. The cons are, this set is kind of hard to find. I basically have only seen it on AliExpress, but let me know if you see it elsewhere. It's also a little expensive, not for what it is. I actually think $41 is a very fair price for 36 watercolors, but because Gansai Tambi is so similar to this, and that is at a much cheaper price, and it's also much easier to find. And they're not different enough from the already available Gansai style watercolors to really stand out in a saturated market. That said, Paul Rubens was probably aware of that. This is not really on any US facing sites. It's not really being marketed to Western watercolor artists. I don't really think they're trying to break into the US market with this particular set. I think there are some sets that they are using to break into the US market, and I've reviewed several of them and recommend several of them, but I don't think that's their intention with this set. So when I say cons, it's not really a criticism to Paul Rubens. It's just something for you, somebody watching this who might be interested in watercolors, might be interested to know. So what is my verdict? This is a lovely set that is probably not aimed at the US market. If you haven't tried Gansai Watercolors, now is your chance. And I have a lot of videos about them that you can check out. Sadie Saves the Day did a wonderful overview on Gansai Watercolors a few years back that y'all might find interesting as well, and I'll try to remember to grab it and link it in the description for you guys. The perks of reviewing art supplies is that it pushes me to try out and seek out unusual art supplies that you guys might not have heard of. That's one of my goals here on the channel, is to try to find stuff that not everybody has already talked about. You know, sometimes having the classics and the staples are a good thing, but sometimes you can really spark your imagination and your creativity by trying something new. Of course, that's not a universal, and that's one of the reasons I actually review these things, because like many of you guys, I get FOMO. I see something new and exciting and I think I have to have it, and then it turns out to have been a waste of money. So hopefully these reviews are helpful. I would not say that the Paul Rubens Gucci set is a waste of money. I think they are wonderful, easy to activate, bright and vibrant watercolors that might be perfect for watercolor floral artists or people who want to paint very immediately and don't necessarily want to do a lot of color mixing, people who might need a lot of greens. That said, I don't really feel like this palette is significantly different from the Kuretake Gansai Tambi palette that is all over the place and is much cheaper than this palette. However, I don't think this palette was meant to be Western artist facing. I found this on AliExpress. I have not seen it on Amazon. It has not been promoted to me on Instagram or any of the other places that I often hear about Paul Rubens products. I think this is a Chinese product for the Chinese market. So I am really glad that I could talk about it with you guys, share it with you guys, and I want to remind you guys that these are bought out of my pocket. I always disclose when something is sent to me, usually multiple times in the video, for those of you who like to skip around. I don't want anybody to be deceived in it thinking I bought something when it was sent to me or that something was sent to me when I bought it. And in this instance, this was purchased because the tubes, which were also purchased, just performed so badly. I felt really guilty about leaving Paul Rubens on a cliffhanger like that because it was clear that that product was no longer available and that that would not be a fair and good faith review, but I'd already bought the tube, so you can see my conundrum here. I thought the fairest thing would be to go ahead and check out the larger pan set. And the only way I can do these kind of reviews, that I can afford to do them, because they do get very expensive, and if you haven't noticed, we don't have any outside sponsorship, is through the sponsorship, the patronage of my patrons on Patreon at patreon.com/natosoup, but also the generosity of my husband. And this kind of brings up something, a project I want to talk about just a little bit, hint at it just a little bit. We're working on a game together. So if you like my art, you like my writing, if you like what I do here on the channel, keep an eye out for information about our upcoming game. I can't wait to work on it and share it with you guys and get you guys excited about it. But it is definitely extremely nerdy and very intriguing. So if you're into the weird intersection of theology and like the digital world and programming, you might be interested in the game that we're working on. So thank you so much to my husband for his support, because again, without his support, I couldn't review these kinds of art supplies. And then the third way, and this is a very minor way, I'm just gonna touch on it, but it's not nearly as important as the first two, is through YouTube views. I am part of the partnership program, which means I do get a little bit of money from people watching my ads. I only run one ad slot. We don't do mid-roll ads. I don't do additional ads. You don't have to watch the ads, but it does help me a lot. When you watch my videos, you comment, you hit like, and you share them with friends. And when you check to make sure that you're subscribed, because all of those metrics actually mean a lot to me. I do read the comments, even though I don't always respond. It kind of depends on where my anxiety's at. So those are all ways that you can help support the reviews that I'm doing here on the channel. Checking out our game when we have more information to share with you guys, joining me over on Patreon, and sharing and liking my videos. 3 really easy ways to help this channel out. So thank you guys so much for joining me for the Gucci review. I really like how this cute little doodlebug illustration, that's what she's holding. She's holding a doodlebug and she's not gonna eat it, even though she's very excited about that doodlebug. But I think this illustration turned out really cute. We're working on updating my shop so that I can start selling originals again. So this will be listed in the shop once I have that. But if you like this illustration and you'd like to own it, you can always reach out to me and let me know, and we can work something out. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I hope this was useful, helpful, and informative, and I hope to see you guys again really soon with another art supply review, tutorial, or artist chat. Bye guys!